If you were hoping for a flood of great Nintendo 64 games after the launch of the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack, then chances are good that you've been incredibly disappointed. That so-called flood is more like a steady drip of titles, with just about one coming out each month since release. For example, today we were given the much-anticipated Banjo-Kazooie, and prior to that, it was Paper Mario in December. Today we're going to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Next Generation, GamePro, and more old-school magazines to see what critics said about these two N64 classics when they were first released. Come, join me for a frustratingly brief episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. In a week that's been dominated by the news of Microsoft buying Activision, I've been reminded of one of Big M's very first video game acquisitions, Rare. Perhaps Nintendo was also thinking about their one-time friend because they just re-released Banjo-Kazooie, bringing one of Rare's most iconic games to the Switch. Released 2 years into the Nintendo 64's life, this is the perfect next step for platforming fans who had already collected all 120 stars in Super Mario 64. While not a radical departure from other 3D platformers, Banjo definitely helped to push the genre forward, and critics were ready to fall in love all over again. Winning the Game of the Month prize in Electronic Gaming Monthly's 110th issue, Dan called Banjo-Kazooie wonderful. It's grand, it's beautiful, it's addicting, and most importantly, it's fun. The game is bigger and better looking than Mario 64. This is a must-buy. The other three critics agreed, though both John and Crispin were quick to point out that the camera was a little finicky. Next Generation also had a number of concerns, including the game's originality. Despite all the above, Banjo-Kazooie feels so much like Super Mario 64 that it cannot be overlooked, which is why we didn't give it a perfect score. On the other hand, Rare must be commended for taking the genre to a new level and delivering an impressive platformer that engulfs players in a Disney-esque cartoon world and makes simple exploration a joy. Of course, most critics were a lot more positive than Next Generation. GamePro gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. N64 Magazine went as high as a 92%. And Nintendo Power went with a 9.2 out of 10, calling it the best of its breed. Armand concluded that the graphics are phenomenal, but what's cool is that they're just a teaser for the incredible gameplay. While there were certainly complaints about the camera and originality, pretty much every critic agreed that Banjo-Kazooie was yet another fantastic 3D platformer for the Nintendo 64. By 2001, the question had gone from can Mario work as a role-playing game to can Mario work as a role-playing game without Square around? I think we can all agree that Super Mario RPG proved that you could set an epic adventure in the Mushroom Kingdom. However, with Square jumping ship to PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 lacking any must-buy RPGs, many critics and fans were once again skeptical about Mario's chances. That concern was short-lived, because Paper Mario is yet another great role-playing game starting a franchise that would go on to spawn a half-dozen sequels and spin-offs. Next Generation didn't mince words when it came to praising the game, calling it one of the best RPGs ever, and definitely the best RPG available on the Nintendo 64. Even with the cutesy graphics and goofy storyline, they argued that it's an adventure game that no hardcore fan of the genre should miss. Give this one a chance, you won't regret it. You ended up seeing similar high marks from the rest of the critics, including a 4 out of 5 from GamePro, an average of 90% from Die Hard Game Fan, and a 7 out of 10 from Edge. Some of the highest scores came from Electronic Gaming Monthly, who gave it their Game of the Month distinction in issue 140 and called it a brilliant extension to the gameplay, characters, and story of Mario RPG. For you old schoolers who didn't take kindly to Mario's 3D transformation, Nintendo has flattened his world right out for this platformer/RPG. If you have a soul, you'll enjoy this game. Mark especially liked the gimmick. The whole 2D paper thing is an inspired move, giving everything a unique and colorful look while avoiding the trademark N64 blur effect. Coming out right before the GameCube launched in the United States, Paper Mario would end up being one of the last truly great games on the Nintendo 64. Hey, thanks for watching this brief episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. Oh man, this has to be the shortest episode yet. It's not even 7 minutes. I guess we'll just have to see what happens next month when we look at The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Hopefully they have some NES and Super Nintendo games coming out with it. I mean, they're still supporting the regular online service, right? Don't answer that. Instead, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite Nintendo 64 game? And do you think it's going to show up on the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack service? In other news, I'm currently hard at work on the second part of the EGM Game of the Month countdown, so maybe you'll see that next week. Or, maybe you won't. We'll see how this weekend goes. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,